Clytemnestra speaks. Gentlemen, citizens, honored Argive elders, I'm not ashamed to tell you how attached to a man I am by nature. People's fear withers with time. It's not from second hand that I report a miserable life, endured the whole time this one was in Ilium. It is a fearsome thing, first, that a wife sits at home desolate without her husband, malignant noises rising all around her. Messengers, screeching evil for her household, keep coming, each with worse news than the last. I must say, if my man caught all the wounds, news of which kept on sluicing to this house, a net would have as many holes to count. And if his deaths had tallied with the stories, he'd be a second Geryon, 3-bodied, boasting a cloak of earth allotted 3 times, thick above, and beneath him, just imagine, when all 3 versions of his body perished. Time and again, after such awful rumors, they seized me forcibly and from my neck wrenched the noose I had fastened to a roof beam. And so our son, that forceful guarantee of our mutual bond, does not stand here beside me. I know Orestes should, but don't be startled. Your ally, Strophius of Phocis, meant well in fostering the boy, as he foresaw harm, and both places muttered it. For you in Ilium, here lawless civil uproar, the council overthrown, it's in the blood of humankind to kick at someone fallen. Certainly my excuse is hiding nothing. Oh, but the roaring fountain of my sobbing has been extinguished. Not one drop remains. My eyes are bad. So late at night I lay, weeping for you, and piles of brush, deprived always of beacon fires. From my flimsy dreams, I used to startle wide awake at gnats' wings. In their shrilling onrush, I saw more disasters for you than my companion, sleep, had time for.
This is Brockport Writers Forum.
Good morning. We're very pleased to have with us today Derek Walcott.
Our guest today is John Barth.
Our guest today, Rita Dove.
Welcome Grace Paley to Brockport.
The writing of Isaac Bashevis Singer. The poetry of Robert Hayden.
Our very special guest today, Lucille Clifton.
Nadine Gordimer. The poetry of Anne Saxton. Today, the poetry of Seamus Heaney.
I wonder if you'd like to read a section from the novel.
Welcome to Brockport's Writers Forum from the SUNY Brockport TV studios on the ground floor of Edwards Hall. I'm happy today to welcome Sarah Ruden. Sarah is our leading English translator of ancient literature of the West, with translations of Vergil's Aeneid, the New Testament Gospels, Aeschylus's tragic trilogy, the Oresteia, Aristophanes' comedy Lysistrata, Augustine's Confessions, among many other works, literally too many to list here. Sarah is also an important literary critic and historian, with which she's supported by a PhD in classics from Harvard. She's written a book about the Apostle Paul in its historical context, a literary biography of Vergil, a book on biblical literature, and most recently, a study of the poetry of Sylvia Plath. And I haven't yet mentioned that she's published her own collection of poetry, nor have I touched on her career as an educator and journalist, including an extended period of work in post-apartheid South Africa. So welcome, Sarah. So happy to have you.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Sarah, would you mind by just starting with what you read, what it's from, and how it sort of fits into that work?
This is from the Agamemnon, a Greek tragedy that's part of the Oresteia trilogy. It's written by Aeschylus and produced around the mid-5th century BC. And it concerns the aftermath of the Trojan War. So the head of all the Greek armies, Agamemnon, is returning to his kingdom and to his wife after having committed a bunch of crimes, not only against the Trojans, but against his own household. He sacrificed his own daughter, Iphigenia, so that the winds would revive and he could complete his voyage and the voyage of all the Greek ships to Troy to reclaim Helen, who'd of course been kidnapped by the Trojan prince Paris. This creates, understandably, a bit of froidure between Agamemnon and his wife back at home, and she eventually takes a lover and she plots to murder Agamemnon, and she gives this matchless speech then to Agamemnon when he shows up back at the palace. Very arrogant, very proud, not a thought in his head about what he has done and how she might react to it. And she's going to have a very, very startling, very violent reaction to it that she's plotted now. And the speech is full of wonderful double entendre about her intentions. She's a very clever character.
That I was asking you that specifically to contextualize that speech, your translation of Aeschylus's speech, as a way of thinking about a much broader question. You know, we interview about 10 writers per year here in the Writers Forum, and we've had translators before, Seamus Heaney, for instance, who did a very important translation of Beowulf and others. But you might be unique in that you're a writer whose primary medium is translation especially of ancient literature, where you express your voice by allowing others to speak, whom maybe we couldn't even hear. And I was just wondering if you could reflect on or talk to us about what it means, or what does it look like to be a writer whose primary medium is the translation of ancient literature.
Right. It gives you a sense of ventriloquism. I think I've been a ventriloquist for most of my career. I did start out when I was very young as a poet in my own right. And in South Africa, my first book published was Other Places, a collection of my own poetry. So I was used to that, and I had, I guess, a sort of reaction against that. And I guess it had to do with the sheer number of great writers in South Africa. I knew J.M. Coetzee myself. He was my neighbor. His office was in the next building at the University of Cape Town. Wow. I suppose that I was a bit overwhelmed by the clash of cultures and the violence and the uproar in South Africa after apartheid. Mm-hmm. And the breakdown that I witnessed, and for example, J.M. Coetzee didn't feel he was able to stay there. He went, first to America, and then he settled now, in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose that, that sort of disintegration of high culture that I saw made me feel, that it was less urgent to get my own opinions, my own thoughts, my own compositions out there. And I was driven back more to an affection and for and dependence on the oldest literature that there is, the literature that's been around for a long time. I did some hard thinking about the basics of human relationships when I was out there, because you really did have an impression of everything falling to pieces. For example, a woman showing up at a conference and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm late. Yeah, there was somebody my husband was trying to help, and we got into the house and he stabbed my husband 30 times. So that held me up."
Yeah.
That was a kind of constant experience. And as a Quaker, I'm supposed to be thinking a lot in terms of, what are we talking about here? What are we doing here? What are our motivations? And I think I felt that my best answer in thinking about human nature and human relations was to go back to the works that I had studied as a grad student and that I was teaching at the University of Cape Town. So going back to Vergil, to Aristophanes, and so on, and thinking about how their voices had lasted and what their voices might have to say to us now, because at least those voices had lasted.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it's powerful. There's an element of that where you felt maybe, I don't know if your voice not being adequate, but certainly like you didn't feel like you needed to put your voice front and center, but still you had something to say, and you had a way to bring voices that could speak to the moment front and center, and that was part of that move towards translation. Were there any works that you were drawn to in that context that sort of maybe became your early translation endeavors?
The second work that I translated, this was after Petronius's Satyricon, was Aristophanes' Lysistrata. And that's a comedy which was first produced in 411 BC. And that was during the catastrophic Peloponnesian War. It's a civil war between Greek states. And Aristophanes was part of the peace party. So he wrote a marvelous farce about all the women in Greece going on sexual strike until a peace treaty was made. So this play was first produced in Namibia. And
wow.
Yes. So
so your translation was first produced, that was where it was, is that what you're saying?
Yes,
yes,
the Lysistrata translation was first produced translation was first produced in Namibia.
Yeah, wow.
And, most parts of Africa have had violence. They've had civil strife in the aftermath of colonialism and other impositions from overseas. They apparently, I didn't see the production, but apparently they loved this in Namibia. And we have evidence from other places in South Africa that women love the idea of withholding sex to quell violence. They think this is a great idea, and in some places have actually tried it. composing this translation and knowing, that it was first produced in Africa, really cheered me up. So, that kind of put me on the road to translations that carry big ideas.
Yeah. That I first encountered your work as a translator in the Aeneid, your Aeneid translation. I'm a classicist by training and a biblical scholar, and so when it came across my desk, it was very soon after I took a position in an English department, the English department here. And the Aeneid, had always been my favorite epic. And I just noticed after, a couple of years of teaching my students this epic in translation that they never had anything near the experience that I would have reading it in Latin when they would read it in English. And the main reason, and I'm going to ask you to sort of think about this, is maybe more of a technical question, and also connected to what you were speaking about before. But the main reason sort of technically is because, as you know, translations of Latin literature often are just so much longer than the original works of literature. And the Aeneid in particular, I think I had one time assigned a translation that was like 2 times as long, like 2 times as many words as the original. It just slows the experience down. It makes it so much denser and just it's harder for students. But I didn't feel that way reading your translation. My students didn't feel that way reading your translation. I was so shocked. I remember when I read it, I thought, well, it must be in some sense abridged, right? But it wasn't. Like whenever I would check it, and I did before assigning it against the Latin, it's like everything is there, right? I can see the Latin constantly reflected in the decisions that you're making. And so I'm wondering if you can speak about, in terms of your translation, not just getting ideas across, but also getting the experience of reading ancient works or seeing performances of them that would be somewhat analogous to what people who first encountered them, where they weren't these old dead things, right? They were living works of literature. It seems to me that's just something that your work does extraordinarily well, and I'm wondering if you can reflect on how you manage that.
Right. Well, I think what I've done, I didn't really start out to do this, but what I have done in practice is to imitate the way that the great authors of antiquity worked. I can't imitate their genius. Mm-hmm. I can't imitate their rhetorical training since the age of 6 or 7. But I can work much the way they do because I do not teach. I haven't had a faculty post since I was at the University of Cape Town. I've been a full-time freelance writer, which leaves me free to spend almost as much time as I would like on every project. And on the Aeneid, I spent a particularly long time. If you take the first and the second editions, it took me maybe as long as Vergil to get the actual text that I was satisfied with. So I started the project, I'm not sure, 2003 maybe. Okay. And then the first edition was published in 2008. Mm-hmm. And then a number of years later, I was contacted by a wonderful scholar, Susanna Braun. She was at the University of British Columbia at the time. And she said, yeah, let's get a better classroom edition of this book out there. And she wanted footnotes, and she wanted, better apparatus for this book so that the translation would be easier to use. But by this time, I kind of disliked the translation. I didn't think, it made me ashamed when I thought about the original. Mm-hmm. So Susanna was patient and hardworking to just superhuman degree. And she helped me rewrite the translation almost line by line. And so we slogged through that, spent about a year on it. And that was published just a few years ago.
Yeah.
Now I'm more or less happy with it. But, Vergil himself wrote that way. He put in work, it's this astonishing amount of work into his compositions.
Mm-hmm.
And he described himself as revising by licking.
Mm-hmm.
That is, he would go over the thing again and again and again, like an animal licking its young.
Mm-hmm.
And that is removing all the dirt, all the debris, and coming up with something clean. Yeah, I did it like that. I just went over it and over it and over it and over it. I had help. He did it without help. So yeah, I can imitate his way of working.
That's interesting that you sort of conceive of yourself as not just reproducing the result, but in some sense reproducing the process. Was there something in particular about the Aeneid too that led you to it fairly early in your translation career, or on at least the earlier end? Do you feel it in particular had or has something to say to us?
Well, that really didn't contribute to my decision to translate the Aeneid. What happened was I had the opportunity to translate it, and I was told pretty clearly that this was my chance. I had to have, I had translated the Satyricon, Lysistrata, and the Homeric Hymns. None of those three are real blockbuster works. They don't have a lot of classroom currency.
Yeah.
But the Aeneid does.
Right.
That's a standard. So they said, you want to do this or you want to do Homer? And the Aeneid's a lot shorter than Homer. Excuse me.
Yeah.
So I said, yeah, I'll do the Aeneid. But, by the time I was far into it, I was in love with it. I just bowled over by Vergil's genius, by his feeling, by his emotion, by his grasp of the problem of being alive, and seeking sustenance and continuity and relationships in competition, in horrible competition sometimes with other human beings. And he had this experience in his bones because he was a gay man. He was a nobody in a society dominated by aristocrats. He was a court poet of, very controlling and power-hungry man, the first emperor, Augustus. He had all of these existential problems, which are just beautifully dramatized in this story of Aeneas, the war refugee, who travels bunglingly to Italy and then has a brutal war to fight to establish a home for himself and his descendants.
Well, we'll take a quick break, and then I want to come and I want to ask about some of your more recent translation, especially as it touches on the Bible and early Christian literature. But until then, please, everyone, take a moment and watch these informative notices about life at SUNY Brockport.
You've worked hard to achieve academic success, but what's next? How can you maximize your experience as both a student and a professional to find work and be a force of change? SULA's Leadership Development Program is the answer for you. Built on the idea that you have the capacity for leadership, our program teaches workplace skills through trainings focused on communication, leadership, and your sense of identity. What's the holdup? Give us a call and start becoming the person who can make an impactful change in your world today. Sula, developing for you.
Have you ever been scared to walk around on campus? Hi, I'm Amanda, a student at SUNY Brockport. I have a solution for you. The University Police Department is committed to your safety. We have a student-run patrol program that provides secure rides to those in need. We pride ourselves on crime prevention and providing a safe environment for students, faculty, and visitors. We also have other resources such as blue light phones and monitored safe exchange zones. Contact us at our non-emergent phone number or our campus escort line, keeping you in mind to prevent crime.
Did you have an obsession with Watergate? Did you watch Succession in a concerning amount of time? Do you spend more time on Letterboxd than with your family? Hi, I'm Jennifer D'Angelo. If you answered yes to any of the above questions, the right place for you is at SUNY Brockport. With 3 concentrations, the Journalism, Broadcasting, and Public Relations Department has a variety of courses taught by award-winning professors. To apply, head to brockport.edu. I can guarantee your acceptance to SUNY Brockport will be the best news you'll ever read.
Are you swamped with homework but your roommates are never quiet? There's a perfect solution right around the corner. Here at the Drake Memorial Library, we offer numerous places to relax, focus, and get homework done. With hours from 7:45 a.m. all the way until 11 p.m., you have plenty of time to come find a spot and get to business. We offer private study rooms, computers free to use, and have amazing librarians who are always happy to help. Located right on 350 New Campus Drive, Brockport, New York. Have any questions? Contact us by phone number or email us. Hope to see you there.
So, Sarah, a lot of both your translations and your writing deals with religious literature that's foundational to the West, and really in some sense to all the world. Not just the Bible, you've translated the Gospels, and you've also written a couple of books on the Bible or biblical authors, but you've also translated Augustine's Confessions, and even things like Apuleius' Golden Ass, which is a really important, at least in my reading, reflection on what religious conversion looks like in the ancient world. A meditation on that as much as Augustine is. And, you know, some people read the Aeneid as also a profoundly theological work. And I'm just wondering, is there anything that draws you? You mentioned your Quaker background in faith. Is there anything that draws you to works that are explicitly religious, that are really like dealing in a deep way with religious ideas, with God, what it means to be a follower of God or a God?
Well, I think this has more to do with my Quakerism than anything else. The Quaker style of worship is a very restrained way of using language, if I can describe it so simply. Quakers sit together in silence, and they consider very carefully which messages might usefully arise out of the silence. What might rise to ministry. So you're supposed to sit there, shut up, and think very hard about what you like to say, and work pretty hard to repress it. You're supposed to say only the thing you feel really compelled to say after much self-examination. So Quakers in their business discussions, which are conducted in the manner of worship, do much the same thing. You're supposed to speak at most only once to an issue, having listened to other people very carefully, and consider what words mean as they address whatever issue it is, even if it's only the color of the carpet that the meeting is going to buy and install. And truly, some meetings have spent years making decisions about their decor. The point is not to get to a decision and do something. but the process of being together and, reaching a consensus that's acceptable to everyone. So this kind of trained you in a very, very careful use of language. So I think that has the most to do with my religious attitude toward writing, my ideological attitude toward writing. So yeah, I've naturally turned to the really, really important pieces of sacred literature like the Bible and Confessions.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. That approach to language in a community is it kind of is a training to translation, right? To the idea that I have one shot at articulating what is really important here, what it means, and I'm going to sit with it until I express what I think it means in the most accurate and efficient way that I can. And it's interesting because I sense that approach not only in your translation, but even in your literary criticism. Your literary criticism, it's a totally separate question I had, but I'll bring it up here. I've just noticed it often focuses more than other, even literary critics who maybe come at it like I'm thinking of someone, say, like Robert Alter, for instance, who is not, he is a scholar, but when he comes at his literary criticism, it's not with this like heavy-duty scholarly apparatus that he's hitting you over the head with. He comes as a reader, as a careful reader. And you do, I sense as well, in your literary criticism, but it's so focused on words, what they mean, what isn't said sometimes, what an author's choice to say this as opposed to something else means. You're constantly reflecting on that, and it sounds like that's part of your sort of philosophy of just communication, your theology of communication, as it were.
Right. Yes, but I was a poet many years before I was a Quaker.
Yeah.
So aesthetics are also very, very, very important to me, and I was never a fan of free verse, except in Sylvia Plath, and a very few other poets of the 20th century. I really love sound. I really want music and poetry. I don't feel that poetry nurtures me unless it has some kind of formal weight. So, I was used to, from a very, very young age, thinking about effect, thinking about punch, thinking about the structure of literary language. And just think, for example, about, a typical joke. You can do this as an experiment. Just alter a word or two in the punchline of a traditional joke and see if that joke works. It likely won't.
Yeah.
So the whole thing is ruined, just by a slight rearrangement.
Yeah.
And a classic joke, is just very carefully made, or it wouldn't survive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think I was, I landed in the right place as a scholar of ancient literature because form and content are so very closely related in ancient literature. Often in the Bible, for example, a key meaning of a passage is going to be bound up with a joke that you may not necessarily even be able to see in translation.
Yeah.
And it may change the character of the whole passage. It may change the lesson of an entire story. My favorite example is in the Gospels. In two of the Gospels, there's a story of Jesus and the Syrophoenician woman.
Mm-hmm.
So Jesus, he's in Tyre. This is a Phoenician town, and he encounters a Canaanite woman she's a pagan. She's untouchable. to pious Jews like Jesus, but she thrusts herself on him, and she demands healing for her daughter who's lying sick, who may be dying. And in a standard translation, Jesus calls non-Jews dogs.
Right.
He is spurning her with the insult that her people are dogs and they don't deserve to eat the bread that Jewish children need.
Mm-hmm.
But very clearly in both versions of this story, it's not dogs. It's the diminutive of dogs. It's a rare comic word, but its tone is very clear. You can look at it in, say, Aristophanes.
Mm-hmm.
You can look at it in other humorous literature, and you translate it as something like little doggy poo. It's a humorous, warm-hearted way of speaking, and they both use this word. Jesus says, the little doggies, can't have the children's bread, and she says, well, even the little doggies get the scraps under the table, right?
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, Jesus just melts and he says, yeah, okay. He takes the point and he says he grants her daughter a healing telepathically from afar.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember.
It completely changes the tone of the story. It explains why he just melts.
Yeah.
And he actually, his mind is changed by this verbal exchange, which, according to the rules, shouldn't even be happening.
Right. Yeah, that's a wonderful sort of example of your dwelling on diction and how that sort of informs your translation and interpretation. I mean, to some extent, because you're right, the idea that the woman enters into this sort of, verbal jesting or contest with Jesus and sort of comes out the winner, right?
She wins, yes.
Yeah. That's something that you can sort of see. You can definitely see it in the Greek, but I have to just admit, right, to my shame, until I saw your work, probably just because I was relying on lexicons, right? I would look up the word and it would just say what it says, and I'm like, oh, that's what it means. But you, in so much of both your translation, and also I think you do a particularly good job of this in your Paul book, where you really say, no, let's do the work to think about what this would actually mean, given this is the way people were talking about this sort of thing in the surrounding area. And in that case, it's just a wonderful example how the tone totally changes from something like, harsh xenophobia to more something like a kind of entering into a patronizing joking that the woman's like, oh, you think we're going to play that way? I can sort of turn this around, right? And it's just a wonderful moment. I wonder too, you were speaking earlier about sort of kind of structure, the effect that words in combination in ancient literature have. There's an example that I just want to read to you and invite you to reflect on it. It's from the Gospels. It's from your translation of the Gospels. I'm going to just read the version of the Lord's Prayer from Matthew, right? And most people will be familiar with the King James Version, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, which has a rhythm of its own. It's very stately. And this is your translation. Our Father in the skies, let your name be spoken in holiness. Let your kingdom arrive. Let what you want happen on earth as in the sky. Give us today tomorrow's loaf of bread, and free us from our debts, as we too have set our debtors free. And now don't bring us into the ordeal. No, rescue us from the malicious one. in some ways it just seems like it would be harder to imagine how you could get further from the effect of the King James Version in your translation. And I'm wondering, like, what sort of decisions were you making? How did you decide upon this kind of direct language? Like, one obvious example is skies as opposed to heavens, right? And that's a kind of decision you're constantly making in the Gospels. Would you reflect on that process?
Right. Yeah, well, it's kind of a complicated set of considerations. And, my Gospels translation sounds a lot different from my other translations. In some ways it sounds, clunky and very colloquial and awkward in places. And that is because the Gospels are such a fraught hyper complicated tradition, textual tradition. And we haven't got a starting point. We haven't got, historical authors we can pin down. And the Gospels, they start out as a translation because the story, Jesus's words, and the stories around Jesus, they start in Aramaic, of course. They start in Judea, where this whole thing happened. But then you have other linguistic traditions there, which are impinging. The tradition of, the Greek koine, it's itself a colloquial language. Then, you have other translation traditions that are starting pretty quickly, Latin, Syriac, and so on. So you don't really have, in the Gospels, you've got a Greek text, that's kind of, after very long, complicated manuscript tradition, it gets pinned down, in the modern world with a lot of virtuoso scholarship, so that you get the Nestle Aland tradition, and that's sort of the modern published tradition, with all the proper apparatus criticus showing, how we got here, all the different manuscript variants, the important ones that are, not all of them, the important ones, why we chose, something of why we chose certain ones and rejected certain other ones. And that's all kind of jumbled together. And it's not really consistent, with the thing I usually translate, which is, a literary, authorial, highfalutin book. It's kind of not like that at all. So what I'm trying to get to is a voice that you can hear through the Greek, but the voice, of course, goes back to Aramaic, and it goes back to this person, and a group of people in Judea, in a very particular culture there, and the Greek authors, to some degree, don't even understand. So you have to balance that. You have to balance, their authorial, though anonymous, their authorial authority, even though it's anonymous. And even though this may be a group project for every single gospel, you got to balance, their say-so against some kind of historical reality, which is very different. So it's a total nightmare project. I thought, so that made me think a lot more about just being accurate than than doing something pretty, with the sound, which you feel certainly obligated to do when you work with like Vergil.
That's fascinating. So first off, that is, that's definitely the effect on, a reading scholar like myself. The Gospels translation it feels very different from your translation of Vergil. But it is interesting hearing you sort of describe that as if you're really trying to take seriously, in a way that I think other Bible translations don't, the idea that this is a composite text that is, traditionally layered. I mean, people will recognize that, but then maybe as translators, they'll lean in, maybe even the best translators have leaned in more on that final author's authority and given it this sort of coherent voice that when you actually read it in the original, it doesn't always possess, right? Sometimes it's much more immediate, much less mediated, it feels, right, than the other literature that you translate. And you definitely get that in your translation. And in some ways, it's very, in a good way, alienating, right? It makes you feel like, I haven't encountered this before, right? Like, so.
Yeah. The voice of ancient sacred literature is different.
Yeah.
It is very strange. It is not what we're used to in church.
Right.
It is not what we're used to in the King James Bible or the New Revised Standard Bible, or just basically any other Bible. It just reflects a completely different worldview, which I think it's healthy to think about. For example, I translate the skies as one word for heaven, and the sky, the singular.
Yeah.
Okay. That's because, first of all, it's literally accurate. You have uranoi, the skies in Greek, and uranos, the sky, which is also heaven. But the thing is, they don't, the ancients didn't distinguish, between the natural physical thing and the transcendent holy thing, the supernatural thing. They didn't, they would have been puzzled at our sort of sharp distinction between, okay, this is the empirical scientific reality right here. This is what we can prove, and this over here is religion. I think their response would have been, what, So, so when the Hebrews, okay, in this, this text does, originate in the biblical, it does sort of draw from the biblical Hebrew, and it passed, into the Greek through Aramaic. We're talking about Shemaim, skies. It is in Hebrew, it's a plural word, and it's impossible to tell exactly why, but maybe they're thinking about the multiplicity of the sky in terms of weather, in terms of size, in terms of, say, all the heavenly bodies in it. So they describe what we say is kind of not even thinking about the term, the heavenly host, the armies. It means the armies of the sky. The stars that pass across the sky are God's armies. They're at war for God and in God's mission. So there isn't a difference between, looking up at the stars and experiencing them as natural phenomenon. Okay, yeah, they will, there's a certain pattern to the movements of certain heavenly bodies, something that we would call now scientific astronomy, and then on the things by which you can reliably sort of measure time, and then the reality, that God goes to war for the cause of his people, and the cause of what he has destined. He sends stars, the stars across the sky, the way that his armies will fight for his cause in the apocalypse. It's all just equally real to them. It's inseparable.
it's really important, and it sort of speaks to my one of my earlier questions, which is, what does it mean to be a writer whose primary medium is translation of ancient literature? And one of the things that it means is sort of trying to enter into the mind and the imagination of the ancient readers and figure out how to communicate that in the best way for the modern reader, the contemporary reader. And there's an example of why Skies is perhaps a better translation than Heaven. But in any case, Sarah, thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you in person next week, although this will suffice for our archival video interview. I want to spend a moment thanking our technical crew, Director Dominic Mruzek, Technical Director Robert Calhoun. On audio is Julia Shaspansky, Character Generator Daniel Bradley. On the camera was Rachel Ekstrom and Joseph Campbell, and Joseph also served as floor manager. As always, special thanks to the Journalism and Broadcasting Department's engineer Michael Smith and to Professor Carvin Eisen, who supervises the production team as a learning experience for SUNY Brockport's journalism students. Thank you. Bye.